Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, Narendra Modi is touring Europe and desperately running from the free press, whilst activists confront him over human rights and transnational oppression. It's making quite an interesting sight. Meanwhile, back in New Delhi, Washington's top diplomat, Marco Rubio, arrives or will arrive to an explosion of state-fueled anti-Western hostility. So can the West ever truly trust India as a reliable ally? Or is this courtship a bit of a dangerous waste of time? And what actually are they courting? While the West buys into India's skyrocketing GDP numbers, rumours from leading academics suggest the economic foundations are built on sand, with figures potentially fabricated at twice their actual value. And even Punjab's own chief minister is screaming financial lockdown. And then, of course, we turn to Canada. Justin Trudeau's popularity has apparently just cratered to historic lows. Now, I'm no fan of Trudeau, but we have to ask, will history honour him for being the only global leader with the spine to hold Narendra Modi accountable over Hardeep Singh Nijjar, amongst other things? And in Punjab, we tear apart the Gaudiya media spin behind the new anti-sacrilege, the Beadbi law. Why is the Panther in open revolt, and why do the Akal Takht and the SGPC view this state overreach as a direct threat to Sikh institutions? And finally, in this packed show where politics divides, culture unites, and we'll feature a film called Mardana's Children. This is a beautiful film premiering today, this afternoon at 4 o'clock UK time, and explores the Rababis of Lahore. They're the Muslim musicians who for 500 years sang the sacred shabads of Guru Nanak. All this and more on today's packed show, and of course we'll take a look at loads of great comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for that. Right, anyways, I say loads to get through today. Let's start off with this tour. This has been a fascinating one, this. And, I have to say, it's been an absolute masterclass in diplomatic cowardice, wrapped up in the glitz and glamour of an international tour. Well, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as we know, is currently touring Europe, attempting to sell the continent his vision of India as this glittering, glamorous, modern, democratic superpower, a beacon of stability, of democracy, and of course a vital economic partner. But, and there's that wonderful big fat word but, that just sort of slaps us in the face with a heavy hand. It is indeed, it is if we go away from that tightly managed, choreographed, sequence of photo opportunities, the reality on the ground is of course very different, and it's hitting back very hard. Europe's free press, and I use those two words very deliberately, free press, yes, because these two words are going to be very, very significant in what I'm going to talk about. Europe's free press and human rights activists are basically there waiting for him on the pavements at these conferences, and they are demanding answers. Now, yesterday, this has gone viral. This is a wonderful one, this one. In Oslo, in Norway, the cracks in that whole PR facade, that carefully managed facade of the Indian tour, are basically being torn wide open. Narendra Modi, had been standing on stage with Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, and he shook his hand, etc., in this sort of lovely sort of set piece. And this was after they both delivered a very heavily scripted joint statement. Now, no questions were scheduled because, as we know, Modi doesn't do unscripted questions. But a local journalist, a lady called Helle Ling Svensson, she's a journalist for the Oslo-based paper Dagsavisen. She refused to follow protocols. As Modi scurried off stage towards the exit, she shouted out across the press room with a voice echoing around the room, "Prime Minister Modi, why don't you take some questions from the freest press in the world?" Now, that question is a pearl of a question. I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm going to play you now that very situation so you can see it for yourselves what actually happened.
Prime Minister Modi, why don't you take some questions from the freest press in the world?
Now, I'm just going to play. Let me just show you one. There we go. That lady there and that look speaks volumes. It was interesting. This video, this excerpt sort of went viral around social media. And many commenters saying that lady, that Indian lady's look just says it all from the Indian perspective. The Indian perspective. How dare you? You know, how dare you breach protocol? How dare you shout out a question to Narendra Modi? So that face, when you say a picture paints 1,000 words, that face paints 1,000 words of India's perspective, because they don't like this. And the key words there, the pearl of that question, the absolute gem hidden inside that question, she quickly shouted out, take some questions from the freest press in the world. What does that mean? It's loaded, because the Global Free Press Index, released about a month ago this year, India sits 157th out of 180 countries in that index, sitting around North Korea, Russia, China. This is India, supposedly the world's largest democracy, sits next to Korea and Russia and China in the Free Press Index. Where does Norway stand? At the top, number one, the freest press in the world. So her question, when I refer it to as an absolute gem of a question, it is an absolute slap in the face of Narendra Modi. A beautifully loaded question. Why don't you take some questions from the freest press in the world? Implying because you are from one of the unfreest, one of the strictest presses in the world. There is no press freedom in India. So that question alone was just worth a whole show. But anyway, let me continue. But as you saw from that clip, Modi, he didn't even look back. He just kept his eyes fixed forward, blanked her completely, and scurried out of that room like an absolute, well, anyway, you fill in the words. But interestingly, that journalist, the lady, tried to catch him later at the elevators in the hotel. Or at that venue, to ask if he genuinely thinks he deserves the trust of Nordic countries like Norway, given his horrific record on human rights and the systematic crushing of free press back home. And the only thing that saved him was the elevator doors that just closed between them. So again, he was saved from the freest press in the world. He just does not like to answer questions for reasons that we obviously can work out for ourselves. Now, the things were not just bad for Narendra Modi. His entire entourage really came up against the free press of the democratic West. And it wasn't just in Norway. Indeed, days earlier in Netherlands, in The Hague, a Dutch reporter from De Volkskrant, apologies for my Dutch pronunciation for you Dutch viewers, publicly grilled the Indian delegation, demanding to know why a visiting Prime Minister was breaking local tradition by refusing to face a joint press conference. Now, this journalist, he pushed them on the fact that Dutch Prime Minister Rob Jetten had directly raised urgent European fears, anxieties regarding declining press freedom in India, and, of course, the targeted violent persecution of minority communities in India, and particularly, of course, Muslims and Sikhs. And this guy, Sibi George, he's from the Ministry of External Affairs. He was the guy who's been rolled out to host this sort of press conference in front of the European press, and he was answering these questions. And his response to the question when he was quizzed on this, it was a farce. He tried to dismiss the entire press corps by then going off on a complete irrelevant tangent, bragging about how many hundreds of millions of smartphones there are in India. It was an embarrassment. I'll play you the question that came from the Dutch journalist. Let me play you this for you.
My name is Ashwin Mondam. I'm a journalist for the Dutch newspaper, the Volkskrant. I have a few questions. In the Netherlands, there is a tradition that after such a visit, both prime ministers are available for questions. I wonder what the reason is that that is not the case today. Another thing is that today, during a statement of Prime Minister Jette, he said that the Netherlands and the European Union are worried about, he said, press freedom and minority rights, among them the Muslim community and smaller communities. I wonder what the responses of the Indian government. And the last question is one of the issues which seemed to capture the attention of the Dutch audience today. You might have heard about it. It's a legal...
And then it went on about a specific question to do with the Dutch citizen in India. But ultimately, what followed, actually, it then followed into complete chaos because other members of the press recognised that this guy had completely evaded the question, completely would not answer the specific questions. Why isn't Modi facing the press? Why is India not answering and being held accountable for human rights abuse, etc.? And other members of the press sort of jumped in and actually sort of descended into slightly sort of chaotic scenes, etc. So, in other words, these guys are not going to get a free pass from a genuine democratic press corps. Ultimately, though, why does this matter? Why is it so important to, for example, the Sikh diaspora? Well, I think it's pretty obvious, but ultimately, this whole story and this whole tour, it's not just about a politician who is thin-skinned. It's more than that. It's about a regime that cannot afford to face an independent microphone because its hands are basically stained with transnational oppression. We know that if Modi were to stand on a podium in Oslo or The Hague or wherever around Europe and face a truly free press, he wouldn't be asked uncomfortable questions. Sorry, he wouldn't be asked about comfortable questions like trade tariffs. He would be asked about uncomfortable topics. He'd be asked about things like the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada. He'd be asked about the thwarted assassination plot against Gurpatnt Singh Pannoon on American soil. He'd be asked about Avtar Singh Kandar on British soil. He'd be asked why his government utilises military-grade cyber weapons like Pegasus that we talked about yesterday to shadow and silence dissident voices across Europe and the West. He would be asked about the persecution of minorities like Muslims and Sikhs in India, etc., etc. That is why he runs scared. And I need to remind you, for example, about Mark Carney, Canada's Prime Minister, when he went to visit India, amongst a whole furore of controversy over, obviously, Hardeep Singh Nijjar and the ongoing transnational oppression. Before he even left, Carney faced a whole barrage of press who were lobbing hand grenades at him, metaphorically speaking, lobbing these questions that were exploding around him. Really uncomfortable, difficult questions. He very skillfully battered them aside. But even in India, when the foreign press travelled to India, they barraged Carney and his representatives with the same questions, question after question. Why are you visiting India? Why aren't you holding India to account about its human rights abuses, etc., etc.? That is a free press. And also that is a leader of a democratic nation facing the free press and answering those questions in whatever skillful way it was. But that is how you hold democratic leaders to account. Narendra Modi is not doing that. He is running scared. We all know why. Because it is blatant authoritarianism. But the big question then, of course, comes full circle back to a big question. Why then is the Western world still so utterly desperate to keep courting India? Why? So it comes back again to a question, and this comes back to the United States. Washington is now planning to send US Secretary of State Marco Rubio to India for a high-profile 3-day bilateral visit and the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting as well. The US ambassador, and I haven't actually got it here, for some reason it's been deleted, but ultimately there's a big post on Twitter, on X, on behalf of the US embassy in India, with the US ambassador boasting proudly, saying Mark Rubio is coming to India, isn't this great, etc., etc. But the US ambassador, a guy called Sergio Gore, he proudly posted this announcement. He's treating the visit as a grand celebration of shared democratic values and strategic cooperation. But if you want a dose of cold reality, you only need to look at the comments section. This is the bit I do have here. Underneath that official American announcement, ordinary Indian citizens, there were pages and pages of these comments. And these comments are really quite interesting. Because these ordinary Indian citizens are fed a daily diet of state-controlled Godi media propaganda. And what the responses are saying, they're not exactly welcoming. They're actually deeply, aggressively scathing of the United States. There are pages of really quite vociferously rude, insulting, nasty comments, basically saying, why are we welcoming the States with these warmongers, these people we don't share values with, etc., etc. I have to say, it was a fascinating insight into the average Indian's mind. I'll say the average Indian, the average Twitter Indian's mind. But ultimately, there is this, clearly evident, there is an explosion of anti-Western, anti-US sentiment that's bubbling out of the ordinary Indian public right now. And part of it is driven by geopolitics, Washington's military posturing, what's going on in Iran, economic sanctions over that Iran conflict that have obviously disrupted India's own regional energy strategies and, of course, their own trade routes. But it goes much, much deeper than that. For years, the state-aligned media, the Godi media apparatus in India, has been systematically indoctrinating the Indian population to basically view any Western criticism of India's human rights abuses or any Western defence of minority rights as a hostile foreign conspiracy designed to hold India back. Those evil Westerners, they're only criticising us because they want to hold us, they don't want us to compete with them. So they're making up all this rubbish about what's really going on in India. Well, so basically, according to these commenters, people like me are making this stuff up. That's the problem. That's what we're up against, because they are so completely indoctrinated by the Godi media that they don't actually know the truth. So again, it comes back to a fundamental question. And of course, a fundamental question that the mainstream media completely ignores. And they'll never really ask this question legitimately. Can we actually trust India? Now, how many times does New Delhi have to show us who they are before the West finally believes them? We're watching a country whose public is heavily, as we've seen, indoctrinated against Western values, whose state security apparatus executes political dissidents on foreign soil, and whose leader, in the form of Narendra Modi, literally runs out of the room when a journalist asks a question. That's the truth. That's the reality. Yet, faced with all that reality that people like me have to remind the world on a daily basis, Washington, London, Brussels, Oslo, wherever, they continue this humiliating global dance. They're treating India as a reliable strategic counterweight to China. We get that. But they're pouring billions in technology, defence, critical mineral partnerships, but they're pouring it into a regime that sees Western alliances as nothing more than a transactional convenience. It suits India's interests. But it is a massive blind spot on behalf of the West. This ongoing courtship, this attempt to bring India on side, it's not sophisticated diplomacy. It's just basically, it is a colossal waste of time and a huge but very dangerous gamble on an inherently unreliable ally. History keeps showing us over and over again that you cannot buy the loyalty of an authoritarian regime. And the West's refusal to hold Modi to account, it's not strength. It is actually, ironically, an admission of our own weakness to the dollar, to the need for trade deals, for profitability. We are willing in the West to sacrifice our principles for the dollar, which proves that we are, ironically, the weaker partner here. And it's an embarrassment. So, talking about India, and actually, ironically, Indian economics, I want to move on now to India itself. And I refer a lot to this issue. And in fact, we had a very good, interesting podcast a while ago about the GDP and the true economics of India. Because, of course, there's the public story, and then there's the real story of what's actually going on. And the title here is it built on sand? And this really is the very big question, because the glossy geopolitical narrative that Modi's selling in Europe, it relies on one very big assumption, that India is indeed an economic powerhouse whose unstoppable growth makes it a future indispensable partner that everybody needs to have a trade deal with. But the big question is, and I'm going to look at this now, is India, is that powerhouse really built on sand? In other words, are its foundations completely weak, pointless? What if that economic so-called miracle is actually just a carefully engineered illusion on behalf of the BJP? Well, for a long time now, whispers have been circulating amongst high-level economic circles and academics. Now, again, I've done a piece on this specifically in the past. These individuals have actually done the hard work. They've actually bothered to look under the hood, beneath the layers of India's official statistics. And the estimates that they've found are really, really alarming. There are credible arguments that India's skyrocketing GDP, its gross domestic product figures, that's how you assess the economic strength of a nation, the GDP. India's GDP figures are a complete and utter systematic fabrication. They've basically been made up. They're fake. And some prominent economists calculate that the genuine GDP is probably less than half of its officially declared value. Now, if you think about that, Western corporations and governments rush to sign trade deals based on a booming market that they think is a booming market of 1.4 billion people. But the real numbers are actually suggesting a massive structural stagnation being hidden behind a wall of state propaganda. That actually the reality is that India's economy is not growing and exploding as the PR leads you to believe. It is in fact stagnating and arguably is actually contracting in terms of real per capita terms. So if you want to see that where the economic strain is actually fracturing the country, you obviously don't need to look any further than a place very close to our hearts, that of Punjab. And even Punjab's Chief Minister, Bhagwant Mann, just this week, a couple of days ago, blew the doors off one of the central government's narratives, off one of the Indian state narratives. He basically publicly alleges that New Delhi has placed an undeclared economic lockdown specifically on Punjab. But this can equally be applied, the same accusation can be applied to various other parts of India. But the accusation is Delhi is systematically squeezing the state's finances and withholding critical central reserves of money, funding, investment. And according to Bhagwant Mann, the central government is deliberately starving non-BJP ruled states of cash, weaponising financial oversight, weaponising funds basically to cripple local infrastructure and public services. So this basically mirrors exactly what we've been saying over and over again, month after month, that Delhi is deliberately starving states like Punjab that are obviously not BJP supporting and have the potential to break away. They're deliberately starving them of funds to try and dissolve their economy. Econicide is the word I even used yesterday in yesterday's show. But it's not just political theatre between, Chandigarh and Delhi. It's actually causing outright panic on the ground. There are serious commentators who are actually raising a few alarm bells on this. Over in Amritsar, the commercial heartbeat of Punjab, the atmosphere among local businesses and market traders has actually now descended into deep uncertainty and anxiety. The central government's, Delhi's, or the BJP government's advisory board, NITI Ayog, as it's called, recently issued aggressive, sweeping, cost-cutting mandates. So instead of injecting liquidity, money, into a struggling regional economy to try and keep it going, try and inject that oil, that lubricant of oil, into the engine to keep it going, they're actually doing quite the opposite. They're advising severe austerity, cutbacks, cutting funding. Now, if you're an ordinary trader in a bazaar or market in Amritsar, this advice that is now in the public domain is triggering waves of panic. People are really now starting to get very concerned about what's going on because, of course, they're facing rising operational costs. They're also facing falling consumer demand. It's a doom loop. When people feel that there's austerity, they stop spending money. They cut back on luxuries. They cut back on literally spending money on anything that they absolutely don't need. And of course, there's a credit crunch. In other words, the availability of credit is now being restricted. So people can't borrow money to invest or whatever for whatever they need. And traders are now asking an obvious question. If the national economy is supposedly growing at record-breaking speeds, as according to the PR illusion, why then is the central government acting like it's completely broke? Why are suddenly these calls for austerity? Why are the hubs of Punjabi commerce being told to tighten their belts to the point of suffocation. It's obvious, isn't it? The reality is you can't hide a hollowed out economy forever. You can't hide the truth about a failing economy forever. When state governments are accusing the central government of withholding reserves, and historic trading hubs are spiralling now into financial uncertainty and going public about it, the PR campaign that's now being sold to Europe does now start to look a little bit thin, doesn't it? And again, going full circle, the West is gambling its whole supply chain on an economic foundation that is now showing, as we're seeing, major internal fractures. So there you go. So it's all very well Modi bestriding the global stage, selling India. But it turns out the whole pitch is based on an economy that's sinking into the sand, clearly. Anyway, let's move on. And Justin Trudeau. I'm chuckling because I'm a little bit sad about this because Trudeau. I'm no huge supporter of Trudeau, as regular viewers know, but I've always stood up and praised him almost limitlessly for his stance over Hardeep Singh Nijjar. But I'm quite sad because apparently he's just now officially landed at the very top of a list that no politician ever really wants to be on. It's a devastating poll released by a company called Research Co, whoever they are. But ultimately, they sent shockwaves through the Canadian establishment. Because according to their latest poll, a staggering 47% of Canadians, that's nearly half of Canadians, now explicitly rank Justin Trudeau as the worst Prime Minister in Canadian history. Now, that's not just low approval ratings. That is a complete and utter historic damnation. A complete rejection. And the animosity is heavily concentrated, actually, in the economic and industrial heartlands. In Alberta, actually, specifically in Alberta, it's 63% believe is the worst ever. And in Ontario, 51%. And perhaps the most damning for a leader who built his entire political brand on youthful optimism. I think he's dating Katy Perry at the moment, some pop star. So he supposedly has this real appeal to the young. He was ranked the absolute worst across every single age demographic, including the youngsters. So even the young, who presumably in the past used to really support him, even they've rejected him. And what makes this collapse so staggering is actually the sheer speed with which it's come about. 10 years ago, he swept into office with a huge majority government, riding a wave of near unprecedented personal popularity. He was a really, really popular guy. He completely wiped the board of every single seat in Atlantic Canada. Today, though, after a decade in Canada that's obviously defined by spiralling living costs, catastrophic housing crisis, massive national debt, deep-seated political divisions, Canadians are just tearing up his legacy. Now, as I said at the beginning, I'm no huge fan of Trudeau, and I have actually in the past criticised him at great length for many of his liberal policies, his fiscal recklessness, his obsession with identity politics, the COVID situation, the truckers, etc., was just unforgivable. It was, and again, I'll make no apologies for holding Trudeau to account for his actions during the lockdown. But ultimately, I have to, as I always done, I always hold this guy up to very, very high regard, ultimately because of one monumental chapter in his premiership, where he does deserve massive credit and support and popularity, really, from the Sikh community. And that was, of course, when Canadian Security Intelligence Services uncovered hard evidence linking the highest levels of the Indian state to the murder by Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil. And Trudeau did something that no other Western leader had the backbone to do. He didn't quietly bury it or sort of try and hide it in diplomatic language. He didn't basically sweep it under the rug for trade deals, etc. He stood up in the Canadian House of Commons and held Narendra Modi's regime directly publicly in front of the world to account. He did so to his own massive political and diplomatic detriment. Delhi, of course, responded with fury. They expelled diplomats, froze visa services, unleashed the full vicious might of the Godi media machine, then to try and assassinate Trudeau's political character across the global stage. And even his Western allies in Washington, here in London, unsurprisingly, Canberra, basically left him a little bit out in the cold. They offered only fairly muted, cowardly statements of concern, not in support, but of concern, because ultimately they were too terrified of jeopardising their own relationships with India. It was totally cowardly, as I said at the time. Trudeau stood alone. He chose to defend Canadian sovereignty and the fundamental safety of Sikhs and of Canadian citizens over easy diplomatic convenience. So, sadly, his domestic record might be in tatters, and Canadians clearly, obviously, threw him out at the last election. History does owe Justin Trudeau an honest verdict, and on that definitive issue of standing up for human rights against transnational oppression, refusing to let an authoritarian foreign state hunt down Sikh activists and Khalistanis with impunity, he did alone show a level of moral courage that puts the rest of the Western world to utter shame. So, there you go. Ultimately, Canadians have their absolute prerogative to not like him as a Prime Minister. But ultimately, from a Sikh perspective, I will always hold him in high regard for that one single act of standing up to India over Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So let's move on. And this is a really big story inside Punjab, actually happening as we speak. It is a story that is just totally packaged up in state spin. As always, very hard to get the truth of the matter because the Godi media have been all over this for at least a week. And it's very hard, obviously, to try and break through the propaganda, try and get the truth out of it. But ultimately, this is all about the Jagat Jyot Sri Guru Granth Sahib Satkar Amendment Act 2026. That's a lot of Punjabi for you. So, ultimately, what is this all about? Well, if you tune into state broadcasts in Punjab, or listen to Bhagwant Mann, the Chief Minister, he is actually framing this new law, this act, the Jagat Jyot Sri Guru Granth Sahib Satkar Amendment Act 2026, he's framing that as a victory, a triumphant victory for the Sikh community, and is now undertaking a statewide, what's called a Shukrana Yatra, that's a Thanksgiving procession, boasting that his government has delivered the toughest law in history against Beadbi, sacrilege, providing for massive fines, asset confiscations, even life imprisonment for anyone who desecrates the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Sounds fantastic, doesn't it? He's using this public relations tour to slam his political opponents and completely dismiss any criticism, claiming that the entire community has accepted the law and that only corrupt factions are opposing it. Well, okay, so goes the Godi media, and of course Bhagwant Mann. But let's just dig a little bit more into the story and out into the real world and away from Mr. Mann's rather self-serving political ego processions. The Sikh community is actually, in reality, in a state of open, furious revolt, as it turns out, because no, all is not as it seems. Even in the last few days, massive Panthic congregations have gathered at places like the Takht Sri Damdama Sahib in Talwindi Sabo, another taking place at a place called Sri Kesgar Sahib in Anandpur Sahib. The SGPC is literally installing massive public boards like this one, for example, to warn the Sangat about the dangers that are now embedded, hidden inside this new piece of legislation. Because yes, all is not as it seems, as it turns out. The Jatadar, the Akil Takht, Jani Kuldeep Singh Gargaji, has openly, publicly condemned the government's actions, demanding that the state back down. Retired Supreme Court and High Court jurists, like Justice Nirmal Singh, are now calling for the entire act to be completely repealed. Why? Why is, of course, the Godi media not asking these questions? If the law punishes sacrilege, Beadbi, with life imprisonment, why is the Sikh clergy, the legal elite, the global vanguard, of the Sikh community completely unified in opposing it, saying this is wrong. Well, if you look past the headlines, the law is not a shield to protect the living guru. It turns out, it's all a Trojan horse. It is designed deliberately and specifically to establish direct state control over Sikh religious affairs. Yes, in other words, all is not as it seems. It's being sold as one thing, but the truth is something completely different. Okay, let's first of all, we'll have to look at how this bill itself was rammed through the Lok Sabha. The draft amendment was actually cooked up in secret one night in April this year, April the 11th to be specific. And then it was pushed through the Assembly in just 48 hours, 2 days later. That coincided with Vaisakhi. How convenient. As we say here in the UK, we have a famous phrase, it's a good day to bury bad news. In other words, when something's happening that makes a great distraction, that's when you release bad news because people won't notice. So clearly this is what's happened. During Vaisakhi, they pushed this through, hoping that all the Sikhs would be involved and too busy looking and enjoying Vaisakhi to notice this bill had passed through. There was no meaningful consultation with the Akal Takht, the high priests, or any Sikh legal scholars. And why did they rush it? Because the text of this act does something very, very insidious. Instead of focusing the full weight of the state on finding and punishing the actual perpetrators and conspirators of Beadbi, like, for example, the recent unresolved cases involving cult leaders who still evade real justice, this law places criminal statutory liability onto the Sikh community itself. Now, what does this mean? Under the provisions of this act, the state government has codified into law what's called the Sikh Rehat Maryada, that is the internal sacred code of religious conduct in the Sikh community, into state criminal law. So they have taken the Sikh Rehat Maryada and they've actually put it now into legal terms and now embedded that into state law. By doing this, the state now has criminalised the administration of Gurdwaras, the local management committees, the Sangat, the Granthi Singhs. So, again, let me explain what this really means. This is setting out a dangerous legal precedent. If a local Gurdwara, for example, if a local Gurdwara committee or an elderly Granthi just makes a simple minor administrative mistake, or if a Sarup's damaged by, let's say, an accidental fire or a water leak, that now is no longer a matter for internal discussion, issues, decisions, whatever, under the authority of the Akal Takht. Instead, now, that control has been taken from the Sikh community itself to deal with in their own way and has now been moved to a criminal offence, triable by a state sessions court. So, in that situation, a Granthi could face a minimum of 7 to 20 years in a state prison for an administrative mistake. The law has basically turned the police and state bureaucracy now into the ultimate decision makers of how the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is managed and handled. So you can see this Trojan horse, this legislation has now wrested control over the scriptures from the Sikh community into the state machinery. You see how that works? And Sikh communities are pointing out something even more horrifying. Under standard police procedure, the second an incident of Beadbi is reported, or even just some mistake, administrative mistake, the physical sarup of the Sri Guru Sahib Ji is legally classified by the state as case property. So, the living Guru, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, becomes an exhibit in a secular bureaucratic police station and becomes a piece of evidence inside a government courtroom. So Justice Nirmal Singh he made a comment publicly this week. He said, the new law appears not to prevent sacrilege, but to commit it. Now, I'm not a Sikh, and even I can work out what's wrong with this. Your holy scriptures, the living Guru, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, suddenly becomes not something that, that is there to be treated with the utmost respect. It is now literally taken away and put in probably in a locker somewhere of evidence. It becomes part of it literally would probably sit on a shelf in a police station marked Exhibit A. I can see a problem with that. I'm sure you guys can. So the law exposes the community to massive state overreach. It extends the definition of sacrilege to expressive conduct, including digital content, hand-sweeping investigative powers to police deputy superintendents. It is frightening. So in the hands of an authoritarian state apparatus, this is a weapon just waiting to be abused, to crush theological dissent, to have a go at activists, to silence activists, to raid independent Gurdwaras under the guise of enforcing statutory respect. It's like a blasphemy law. It's terrifying. So Bhagwant Mann, he can, beat his chest on his political rallies all he likes. But fortunately, in Punjab, the Sikh community and the Panth see right through this. They know exactly what this is all about. The sanctity of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji rests solely only with the Panth. It cannot and will not be subjected to bureaucratic regulation, state control, police administration. It is dangerous overreach. And really, the Sikh community must make sure this never happens, because you guys, I'm sure, can work out what the implications of this new Amendment Act are. It's absolutely terrifying. So anyway, fingers crossed that the Akal Takht and all the various organisations in the Punjab can prevent that law going through, a law that was rushed through essentially in secret to avoid the scrutiny that any normal democratic nation would of course allowed it. Any normal parliament, that law would have been subject to all sorts of debates and scrutiny, but not in India. Right, let's move on. And I want to finally move away from politics and state legislation to something a little bit more cheerful, sort of cheerful. It's more about a reminder of who Sikhs fundamentally are, and a lot about the culture, etc. And we do often talk about this deep, unbreakable cultural tie that connects Pakistan and Indian Sikhs. Of course, that border that was artificially driven through brutally through Punjab, that divided the Sikh community in 1947. Well, despite all those bitter geopolitical rivalries between Delhi and Islamabad, and I've talked a lot recently about Pakistan's recent, and I have to say highly welcome, efforts to restore and promote Sikh heritage across West Punjab, whether it's the churches or whatever. But I want today to look at something very different. I want to look at an internal living heritage that's going on today in Western Punjab, in Pakistan. It's all about music, because borders, politicians, religious orthodoxy are all there ultimately to divide us. They serve to divide our communities. But one of the big unifiers is music. Music remains the ultimate cross-border uniter. So this afternoon, today, 4 o'clock UK time, so you can work out your own time zones. It'll be obviously later. So it'll be early morning for you guys in the United States when you guys are waking up in North America. There is a really nice short film about to be launched. It's called Mardana's Children, The Rababis of Lahore, and it premieres on YouTube. In fact, I'll try, if I remember, I'll put a link in the description. The premiering the film on YouTube, UK time 4 p.m. this afternoon. It's produced by an organisation called the Mardana Project, and it's directed by a guy called Nathan Drillot, and it documents a centuries-old musical lineage that is actually on the brink of extinction, which would be very sad. Now, obviously, I don't know a lot about Punjabi music, and I guess you guys out there probably have a much better understanding of its intricacies. But ultimately, this story is about, it's not about musical theory, it's actually about shared devotion, survival, and actually a direct link to Sikh history, because the Rababis, who this is all about, they're a community of hereditary Pakistani Muslim musicians who trace their lineage back again over 500 years to Bhai Mardana. He was the Muslim minstrel, the lifelong companion, and the very first disciple of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. So when Guru Nanak travelled across Asia, awakening the world to the oneness of creation and all those wonderful messages he was bringing, it was Bhai Mardana, this Muslim musician, who walked by his side, plucking his strings of his rabab to provide that wonderful musical sort of background context to the Guru's divine poetry. And from that partnership, that really sacred partnership, all the way back to Guru Nanak, the Rababi tradition was then born. That's where it stems from. So for generations, these Muslim family lineages served the subsequent Sikh Gurus, and they held an exalted official place as Kirtanayas, again my Punjabi pronunciation, Kirtanayas, singing the sacred Shabad Kirtan daily inside the precincts of Sri Harmandir Sahib, the Golden Temple. And they held on to their Islamic faith, but they still held the sacred Gurbani in their hearts, passing, of course, the authentic oral knowledge of the Gurus, ragas, down from father to son, down through each generation. So, of course, that was all torn apart in 1947 with that dreadful partition, that awful, bloody, literally bloody line that was just driven through Punjab, that then estranged these guys from the Gurdwaras and the Sikh brothers that served for 5 centuries. So they were essentially just literally, just brutally pushed into West Punjab in Pakistan and separated from the people, the very people that they had bonded so deeply with for centuries. So again, it's another sad victim of that dreadful time of partition. They were ripped from their spiritual home and then forced across into West Punjab now. So it is really a wonderful tradition. But this film will show, despite decades of political hostility and closed borders, all sorts of rigid religious orthodoxy, that spiritual love, that flame of spiritual love that united Guru Nanak Dev Ji and Bhai Madana, it is still there today. It still continues with these musicians in Lahore. So this film is a tribute to this shared heritage that survived partition, survived everything that's happened since. And it is, as they say, it is a call for solidarity and a reminder of the non-sectarian roots of the faith. So I'll play you the trailer now so you can watch the trailer. But as I say, 4 p.m. UK time on YouTube. Do have a look at it. It does promise to be something really, really quite special.
कहता सी इधर ਜਦੋਂ ਆਏ ਆ ਇਹ ਪਾਰਟੀਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਫਿਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਇਹਦੀ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਕੋਈ ਆਨਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਬੁਲਾਇਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਬਾਬੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਖੀ ਪੜੇ ਜੇ ਪਿਨਾ ਦੇਖਾ ਸਭ ਆਕਾ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਸਲ ਸੀ ਬਾਬੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੁਲਾਇਆ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਇਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ रबाबी फिर कोई होर निकम्मा च पै गई कोई सेलमैन हो गया कोई पढ़न लग पिया कोई मजदूर हो गया कोई कुछ हो गया सानू इन्होंने नहीं बुलाया रबाबियां नूं इन्होंने नहीं बुलाया
उन्होंने आके ते बड़ी पैड़ी गड्डी मेरे लत्त च मारी और लत्त फ्रैक्चर हो गई और नाल कहने लगे कि तुसी ना गाया करो मगर अस फिर भी बाज नहीं आ रहे क्योंकि करते सी इबादत रही
There you go. Right, let's move on to our comment section. Thank you to you guys for all your contributions on the comments. Loads to get through. I've only got not very long to get through them all, so I'll have to rush a little bit. But anyway, TC starts us off. I did an interesting podcast, a series of 3 podcasts with Dr. Grewal. We're currently looking at the Sikh youth leadership and what the future leaders of the Sikh community, the sort of skills that they will need to learn and master to become ethical and successful leaders in the future. And the third part of that series, the first 2 were last week, the third part will be released on Friday this week, so do keep an eye out for that. We had lots of feedback from you guys, thank you for those. TC, as you actually say, critical thinking skills are so invaluable to the path. Essential for analysis, futuristic management, etc., etc. Don't follow narratives blindly, no matter how convincing and how important is that in this age of misinformation. It, as I say, it was actually very interesting, the whole podcast. One of the things that did come out, interestingly, I do urge you to specifically watch this one, The Art of Compromise. As a case study, Dr. Grewal compared the establishment of the United States as a nation in the very early days of how they learnt how to compromise to unite the nation that then became the great nation of the USA that it is today. Without that compromise, then the USA would have never have existed. And it was an interesting contrast. I did bring this out in the discussion. Contrast that with India, where actually they're doing completely the opposite. Then there is no compromise from Delhi. Quite the opposite. They're actually uncompromising, which is inevitably leading to the breakup of India. This is why India is no longer uniting. It is actually breaking up. But anyway, do watch that podcast for that one. Cool Lieno, thank you for your comment. You said it was a very informative session. It was indeed. Leadership is not dominance, it is a responsibility. What an important quote that is. Absolutely. In other words, great leaders are not those who just who dictate and demand and order. Of course, they understand the responsibility that they hold as leaders. It is all about consulting with the people, something that the Indian government clearly fails very strongly on, I have to say. Pegasus. We had a lot of comments about the Pegasus story, unsurprisingly, of course. Gabru starts us off. Thank you about the great information. Many Sikhs don't know about this. Many people around the world don't know that this Pegasus software that was developed by Israel, it's sold all around the world to all sorts of fairly dodgy regimes, I have to say. I wouldn't be surprised if our own governments here in the West are probably using it against us. I mean, I would not be surprised in the least. So yeah, be warned. Hap B, as you rightly point out, Pegasus that came from Israel, Russia, Afghanistan, you name it. It's been used against Sikhs specifically all around the world, as indeed it has. Minder Singh, this is actually a very important point. Indian intelligence don't just use Pegasus. They use a whole raft of tactics, techniques, you name it, spying, surveillance, to keep an eye on potential dissenters, political dissenters. We do know, and I've heard all sorts of reports and even spoken to people directly who know that their Gurdwaras have been infiltrated, as you even refer to here. Is that Melbourne, I think you're referring to? That yes, even our own Gurdwaras have been infiltrated by people who pass information, intelligence, back to RAW, the NSA, or whatever, back to India, basically. In other words, you've got to be very, very careful. The whole diaspora, particularly if you're a Khalistani activist, as I don't need to preach to the converted, you guys are obviously aware of this, but gosh, you've got to be so, so careful. Assume that you are being surveilled in every step that you make, particularly when you're using anything electronic, your phone, tablet, PC, you name it, phone. They're all, of course, they are all probably surveilled. They are probably infiltrated by all sorts of intelligence agencies, but specifically RAW as well. Baz, a little bit more robust in your responses. Look, fine. What can they do about it? They're the biggest cowards in the world. They can't even fight face to face. All they do is manipulate and send their slaves to do their part. Yeah, all I would say is that absolutely, I totally admire your totally robust stance on this. But ultimately, never underestimate India and never underestimate their motivation to kill and murder, harass, intimidate their political dissenters. So always, always, always be careful. You can be as brave and be filled with as much bravado as you like, but still be very, very careful in everything that you guys do, particularly those who are publicly supporting Khalistan. Stay safe. Well, this is an interesting comment. There'll be microchipping us next. All I would say on that, stay safe, you joke about it, with a laughing face. Yeah, I mean, the great David Icke, for those of you who are aware of a guy called David Icke, if you read any of his books, and I read one of his books, gosh, it must be 25, 30 years ago now, he warned much of what is going on today, the sort of Orwellian state that we're rapidly, all of us, moving towards. He warned all sorts of things, authoritarianism, and how this, the New World Order, globalization. He predicted all this. And one of his predictions, which still remains equally valid, is that we will all be one day microchipped. The mark of the devil, as many Christians often refer to it as, that he predicted we will all only be able to exist in society once we're microchipped. Now, we already all carry phones and all sorts of things. Digital ID. How can you exist in many places without a digital ID? The next obvious step is embedding a chip somewhere. It's so I say, don't laugh. Resist this evil New World Order, globalist, dystopian future they're planning for us. It's up to us, and particularly the Sikh community, who have always stood up to state control, authoritarianism, oppression. The Sikh community, I'll guarantee, will form the vanguard of the rising up against it. Stay safe. Yeah, and again, we don't have time to get into sort of detail about this comment. Loads of information and loads of advice from Stay Safe. Just be careful with your phone. Turn it off when you're not using it. Reboot it regularly, because as you say, that seems to disrupt the spyware. The spyware clearly doesn't like that. Remove your battery, etc., because of course they can't track you if you remove your battery. But you also point to the fact that all these devices, and don't forget, all these devices, as Edward Snowden pointed out, as you rightly say, Stay Safe, Edward Snowden, the great whistleblower, exposed all sorts of really incredible surveillance stuff that's going on. And there'll be stuff that we're not even aware of that is going on. And of course, almost by definition, the intelligence agencies are using systems and capabilities that we have no idea exist. So the default position that all of us must assume is that we are always being listened to, being looked at. Your phone listens to you. I know that. I've seen it enough times. Just look at the adverts that appear on Facebook when you've been talking about something. Suddenly, magically, the first advert is what you've been talking about. So they listen to us. So assume that everything around you is listening to you. That's the safest default assumption. Critics Corner, welcome back. It's been a while. Nice to see a YT user, YouTube user. Hello. This is an interesting one. I'll have to translate this because this was in Punjabi. I had to get a bit of technology to translate this. For you guys who don't speak Punjabi, like myself, this says, India wouldn't spend a dime on you idiots. Laughing my ass off. India does not use Pegasus against Pakistan. There's no need to spend that much money on fools, idiots like you. Thank you for that, for your input. All I would say, of course they use Pegasus against all their enemies. They use all sorts of techniques. It's no secret that India hates Pakistan. Operation Sindoor recently was just a recent manifestation of that. They are old rivals. So it is not beyond the realms of probability that India will be mobilising every tool, technique, weapon it has to both spy on Pakistan and attack Pakistan. So, no, I hate to say it, YT user CB4FG. It's not us that are the fools, the idiots. If you honestly believe that is not the case, then I don't mean to be rude, but I think you need to sort of take a step into the real world, mate. It's very clear what India are up to. And, of course, Pakistan is one of many targets. Hardal Singh. Yes, I would totally. In fact, this comment I think should just be in font size 72 in bold form and posted up on every wall around the world. I don't trust any political parties. I mean, what more do I need to say? But as you rightly say, Starmer, the British Prime Minister, should resign for good. He's untrustworthy. I think your language is very euphemistic. Your language is very contained. If I was an anonymous commenter on YouTube, my language about Starmer and politicians would be a lot more fruity and certainly not printable. Certainly not on our delicate show. So, but anyway, thank you, Hardal Singh, for your contribution. Totally, wholeheartedly approve and support it. Mountain Forest. Indian economy is very fragile. One little push, Union of India collapse. Well, I won't say you heard it here first, but yes, indeed, absolutely. That circles back to what we were talking earlier in the show. How absolutely right you are. And truth is life or death. India is a dead country. The RSS will be finished soon. Khalistan, Manipur, Assam, Eastern Provinces, Kashmir. They'll all be freed from India. I mean, you know where we're going. Of course, that is the truth. We know where it's happening. It is only a matter of time. Khalistan is literally only a matter of time now. Amrik. Welcome back, Amrik. Nice to see you again. You're doing good work. Well, you're claiming I'm doing good work. I'm just doing God's work. And in fact, this comment, when I read this comment, it did remind me of something. You say, you bring us the current news as well as linking them to the perspective of Sikh sovereignty. We feel elated and full of joy that you tell the world Sikhology as much as our history. It reminded me, and I've mentioned this before, when early on when I joined Satellite TV, I sat down with Tony Mangat, the gentleman who owns this channel and takes care of this channel. And he said to me, we had a very good conversation, and he said he felt genuinely that it was God, Vaheguruji, who had brought me to the channel to do this work that I'm doing. And I thought, well, yeah, okay, fine, if that's what you believe. Because I was just a freelance journalist, and I was brought into Satellite. And it's only recently I've actually started understanding the weird ways of the universe. Because what were the chances of just an ordinary British freelance journalist who didn't even understand, never even heard of Khalistan until I joined the channel? I didn't know much about Sikhs other than, I knew they were great soldiers, etc. So what were the chances that they would approach me, of all the people in the world, the freelance journalists across all the websites, etc. They found me, who is now 100% motivated, passionate about the very cause of Khalistan that would align so deeply with this whole cause. An ordinary journalist, they would have paid lip service to it and gone on with their day job. But I was totally different. I am now totally absorbed into this whole Khalistan movement as a passionate supporter and follower of it. And indeed, so deeply aligned with Sikhs, although I'm not a practicing Sikh. My own personal values align with Sikhi. So your comment, Amrit, is actually very pertinent, because clearly the universe does work in interesting ways. God works in mysterious ways, as I think as Christians often say. Vahiguruji knew exactly what he was doing when he brought me into this channel. So all I am doing the work as a loyal servant of hopefully the Panth and indeed of Vahiguruji, etc. So yeah, there you go. It's don't thank me, thank your faith, thank whoever's looking after us all. So anyway, thank you for that comment. Jagdev Singh. Well, here we go. Vahiguruji ka Khalsa, Vahiguruji ka Fateh. Khalistan Zindabad. And indeed, Narinder Sidhu. Hello, Narinder Sidhu. Welcome to the channel. Khalistan Zindabad. That is really what it's all about. That is why I sit here. That is... Ooh, hello, wrong button. That is why you guys... That's why you guys are out there watching. Because we are all united. We are all aligned in one heroic, wonderful cause. And we know it's going to happen. Khalistan is the cause that brings us all together under that wonderful Sikh faith and the Sikh banner. So... that is it. I must draw the show to a close for another day. But thank you so much for all your comments. Do keep them coming. Do keep your emails coming. message@sutledgetv.com. Thanks for all your support. Do let me know as many of you have been doing, any articles that you think I need to read, know about, research, and then bring back, of course, to a wider audience. Let me know your stories. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your perspectives. And of course, if you're a critic, welcome to Critics Corner. Let me know in any rude form that you fancy. Don't just insult me, but explain anything that you disagree with. It's always fun to have a bit of banter. That's it anyway for another day. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you, God willing, tomorrow.